It's time for the glass half empty side of the world. This is the second in a little two-part video set of things that are good, things that are bad, and let's go bad today. Hey there, this is Perch. So this, like I said, this is the second part of a two-part video set. The first part went through a lot of things that are going on in comics right now that are positive, that are good things that maybe not always obvious as we kind of hear a lot of negative complaints and problems. And like I said in the last video, it's normal. It's not bad. We shouldn't feel bad about talking more about the bad things than the good things, because generally speaking, as humans, as people, we we just take the good things for what they are. We accept the positive elements. We enjoy them. We don't overanalyze them. We don't try and pick them apart. We just are happy about them. It's the bad things that we tend to pick apart because we're trying to put meaning to them and understand them, and in some cases come up with solutions. So it's normal that the bad things are talked about more, and hopefully there's a little bit of that spirit in what I'm about to go into. So, what are the problems in comics today? And certainly there's the obvious ones that have been talked about. I've talked about in this video, this channel, I should say, many times. But at a bigger sense, what's wrong? Well, I said in the last one that the business is stabilizing to some extent. It's not erratic. And then I made a small little comment that I want to go into more depth here, which is, it's stabilizing, still not to where it needs to be. And kind of that is the big overarching thing to start with, is that comics as an industry is still not anywhere close to where it needs to be, and from multiple fronts. The two big publishers are owned by two mega corporations, and both publishers are insignificant parts of their business. And no matter what they do, I mean, if Marvel and DC both grew their business 100% over the next 3 years, I mean, they doubled every year over the next 3 years, they'd still account for around 1% of their parent company's business. And that's a nothing number. Now, granted, and I think, I said this on Twitter at one point, they're still responsible for driving, multi-billion-dollar IP, and so they're going to be valuable. And their big parents are unlikely to shed Marvel and DC. People are always asking, hey, when do they shut DC down, or when do they sell off DC to another company? Never, because if you're AT&T Time Warner, if you shed DC Comics, it's going to go to, Disney would snatch it up immediately. They'd merge the universes, they'd start putting things out. And granted, again, Disney's not going to care about the comic line, and that's why this is in the negativity standpoint. But they are going to start pumping out movies. They're going to turn their multi-billion-dollar IP into more multi-billion-dollar IPs, and vice versa. Disney's not going to let Marvel vanish. So these things are going to be kept alive, but the negative part of all this is they're insignificant parts of their business, so they don't care in the way they should. The problem with the comic publishers, the big two right now, and the negative thing is that there's not heavy oversight into them. They're managed and run by people who do not have a lot to account for, and if anything, their main motivation in life, if you're in high level, senior level Marvel or DC management, your goal is to not rock the boat and lose out on your Disney or AT&T stock options and guaranteed bonuses and other things. That's what you're playing for. You're playing for longevity and retirement. You're not necessarily playing for shake up the world and make comics grow in shops and all the rest. That doesn't help your bonus. Certainly if you're successful in everything you do, it would, but when you get that high up in a corporation, you start playing it very, very conservative. And that's what we see now. You see a very conservative approach, a very slow approach in a lot of cases to comics. And this isn't healthy for readers and for people who want to see kind of some movement, some momentum, and some hunger. I'll give you an analogy. It's a little bit like when the WWE and WCW were rival promotions and they were fighting each other on TV. And that time brought about a real boom in creativity and really listening to fans and really kind of delivering the best they could possibly deliver. TV ratings were high. There was a sense of danger. Wrestlers were jumping from one promotion to the other, and all of these elements added up to to a pretty engaging time for fans. And then the WWE bought the WCW, and it all started to go away rather quickly. Without that competition, the game changed for the WWE to, instead of trying to aggressively go out and find viewers and grow their business, it instead changed to a more conservative kind of hold on to what we've got, make incremental progress. And the ratings have gone down steadily over the last 20 years to the point that it's just not as interesting of a product anymore. Um, so I think in comics we have a similar problem. It's not as interesting a product because the big publishers are lost in the shuffle of kind of their corporate owners. And I think that's a big negative. I think that impacts certainly readers, and it impacts shops because the shops do not have the big financial backing. They're not playing for a conservative game of a Disney bonus. They're playing for survival. And so when you're playing for survival and you've got a product that you're trying to sell that is playing for just kind of keeping the lights on, that those two don't go together well. And I think we see that in how it plays out every week. Another thing that I think is a negative, I talked a little bit about social media and how things seem to be improving. They are, in terms of really kind of obnoxious, antagonistic behavior. Absolutely, things are getting better there. But there's another side of behavior that has persisted in comics and I think has continued to come out. And you see it not just with creators and professionals, but you also see it with kind of anyone in this community who gets a decent following, either on social media or YouTube or anywhere. And there's an arrogance that really persists in this business. And it's not just comics, by the way. You'd see this in Hollywood. You see this in the news media. You see this all over the place, where there's this "I'm better than you" mentality that really exudes out of these people's social profiles or videos or whatever. There's and that arrogance is puts a wall between fans and readers and professionals or people who have this kind of following. And you don't really notice it all the time until you interact with a Brian Hill or somebody who has a very kind of humble demeanor, very engaging personality with fans, and then you start to notice this other behavior that is very, very standoffish, very "I'm better than you" kind of mentality. And it's, this is normal. And again, in every kind of community and every kind of business, you have tiers that get set up, and you have people who achieve some success. And then, it's not the newest phrase in the world. Success goes to people's heads. But in comics, when you're trying to grow and we're trying to build an audience, and we're trying to get kind of more out there, that's not helpful or healthy for anyone to really have to deal with. And so it's behavior that exists in many places, but it's a behavior that really is harmful and negative to comics right now in terms of what it's trying to do and how it's trying to go and engage people. I think that's a problem. There's some other things. I think the production quality of comics. There's comics that are printed in just a way where the ink is coming off on your hands, or the quality is low at times. I think that continues to be a negative, and there's not a big momentum or motivation to change any of that. It's just kind of, this is what you get. The prices we've talked about a lot. The prices are way too high for growing an audience. This is not a business that is in any position to gain readers and get more people to the table. And we won't see any kind of big growth in this business until prices can come down to a point that's reasonable for the market they're trying to target. And speaking of the market, I think that's another big negative that still really persists in comics, is that there's still a large amount of books that are being written and aimed at a market and audience that doesn't necessarily exist or isn't buying comics. It's where you target a product at somebody. It's like Zima. Zima as a drink was designed to target an audience that it never found, and so it became a bit of a bit. It became a complete joke, and comics feel like Zima at times. Of it's they're being written with kind of an offbeat humor that feels like a very pale reflection of Joss Whedon type writing and comedy. If you squint your eyes, you can kind of see that influence there, but it's not done particularly well. And it also isn't a type of humor that translates, particularly, it doesn't translate to comics. And that audience that enjoys that type of humor has shrunk quite a lot from people who used to watch Buffy the Vampire Slayer. It's changed. So I think that there's a big handful of these moments of these comics and this writing style that's just it's being made for a market that is not around, and they keep coming out largely because of the first thing I mentioned, that the publishers just don't care right now. They're not playing for really trying to find that market. In many cases, there are signs of positivity, as I mentioned in the last video, but in many cases, these comics are just kind of being churned out, and there's nobody kind of raising their hand and going, "Hey, is this the Deadpool that we want? Who's the fan? Who's the target market?" There's something that goes on right now in tech and a couple other companies where it's called you've always had usability studies and tests where you kind of market test your product before you put it out into the public. And lately, there's a trend, I would say. It's always existed, but these things get named. So the named trend is called, working from personas. So the personas is you kind of invent a customer. You say, here's Fred, and Fred likes, this and this and this. This is the background. This is what Fred enjoys. This is what Fred is and deals with and would consume. And then you take your product and you line it up against Fred. And you say, okay, would Fred, knowing who Fred is, his sensibilities, knowing his persona, does this product fit Fred? How would Fred engage with this product? How would Fred read it or consume it or use it? And in some cases, it's used to try and identify the target market. In other cases, it's used to kind of say, here's persona number one, it's an older person. Here's persona number two, it's a younger person. Are they both going to interact with the product in the same way? Do we need to change parts of what we're building to meet the needs of both customers? None of that's happening in comics. That voice, that person who's pushing for that doesn't exist. So comics have become far more of just kind of a wild shot in the dark, and that's not healthy. That is a negative. So I think, in general, when I think about this business, I think that there continues to be a lot of potential. I think there are signs to be optimistic about, like I mentioned in the last video, but there still remains a large amount of problems, and these problems are worrisome from the standpoint of, the first thing I mentioned. I don't know if there's a lot of motivation to fix any of this. If the comics are doing well enough that people are keeping their bonuses and their stock and kind of their long-term incentives, and the companies are working for, they're just trundling along. And so if we're going to get in there and start to disrupt that, then your people who are in charge are putting their positions at risk. And so they're not going to do that unless they're forced, and they're not going to be forced unless there's a compelling reason for people in higher management to do that. When you terminate or you remove somebody in high level management, you have to pay a lot. It's not, you have people who are higher up tend to sue more. Typically you have some restrictions and conditions in the contract about how firing or removal happens. So when you get people into big positions of power, you're less likely to want to go in and mess with it. It all kind of boils down to, is it worth the trouble? And the challenge with comics is, and this is a good place to end on, for me, as a reader, as a seller, as a fan, as somebody who's loved comics his entire life and wants to see it succeed, and will push whoever the creator, no matter how nice or nasty the creator is on social media or wherever they happen to be, I'm still going to push those comics because I love them and I'm trying to survive as a business. Um, it's hard when you're that tied in and that kind of not emotional, but you're that connected into things to deal with a reality where but at the end of the day, the people making the decisions are not like you. They're not as emotionally connected. They don't need it, and so the decisions are don't have to be made in the same way. It's a tough one. I hope you enjoyed this two-part series, kind of the goods and the bads. Listen to both and got something out of it. If you did, leave me a comment below. What are some other bad things I missed, or what'd you like or not like about this set? Leave me a comment, like, subscribe, click the bell for notifications, and thanks for listening.